This was the first American election with legal and widespread betting. We sat down with one of the nation's leading experts in this field to find out how much money this generated and what it means for future elections. It's new tonight here on The Current.
We are joined now by Coleman Stromp, one of the leading experts on election betting. You've been studying this for the better part of 2 decades. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
Can you start by giving us some context here? This is the first election where betting is legal, but it doesn't mean it's the first election that betting has happened in.
Right. So we've had betting on elections in the US pretty much going all the way back to George Washington, but in a sort of big way for over a century. And even in the more recent period, while we haven't had legal betting, a little bit like sports betting, we've only had legal sports betting in much of the US since 2018, but I'm pretty sure most people were familiar with sports betting prior to legalization. So there's all sorts of ways to place bets on the election, even if it wasn't legal and authorized.
So, put this into context for us. How much money did this generate?
Right. So the answer is it depends on what you want to count. So if we look at markets that are fully legal, you'd probably come up with about $300 million. If you look at all the markets, which include ones that aren't legal and regulated by the U.S. government, then you'll get up to a number about 10 times as big. You'll get like $3.5 billion. So there's a lot of action, and yeah, much of it's still not regulated.
And both of those numbers, is that counting bets happening in the country and also outside of the US?
Right, right. So in almost all these markets, it's hard to know who's actually making the bets, and you would presume, most of the people are Americans because we're more interested in this election outcome. But this was a pretty unusual election, so there's probably actually, I can say for sure, a good chunk of that was non-Americans as well.
You and I spoke before election day, and we were talking about the markets, and they heavily favored Trump to win the election. What does this tell you that the betting election markets were so different from polling?
Yeah, I mean, polls have really had a tough time for the last going on 10 years. And in Iowa, there was a very noticeable and nationally prominent poll that came out over the weekend, the Selzer poll, which is one of the more influential polls. And I don't know what else to say, but it was totally dead wrong. It said Iowa was going to go blue, and yeah, that's not what happened. So polling, in this cycle, to be generous, it did poorly, would be my sort of summary of what they told us. Markets, on the other hand, as you said, they pretty much told us what was going to happen. They said Trump was going to win. They said Trump was going to win battleground states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona. And, why is this? In my view, it's because of the fact that people don't participate on these markets unless they're sure about what they're thinking and what their views are. So why is that? Because they have to put money down, and you don't put money down on things you don't usually know much about. So people in those markets are pretty smart. I will safely say I don't participate in the markets, not because I'm not interested. I'm not as smart as those people. So I'll defer to that.
So, what does this tell you, though, going forward? Should we rely on the data from markets maybe more than we do with polls? I know that's a pretty generalized statement to make, but what's your take on that?
I think so, and I hope so. I mean, the markets. I mean, I should just be clear: the markets are not perfect, just like any forecast. But it's, in my view, the best forecast that we have, and I think having more and better forecasts are helpful for everyone. And so to the extent that the legal environment continues to allow these markets to exist, if we were to have this conversation in 2028, I imagine these markets are going to play a more central role in our conversations about what we think in the weeks and months leading up to the election.
Well, then, Professor Stromp, I will see you in 2028.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Great, thanks.
And to give you some more context here, American adults wagered more than $23 billion on the Super Bowl and nearly $3 billion on March Madness this year, which does outweigh the election bets.